Using fMRI, Lazar and colleagues in 2000 concluded that the practice of meditation activates neural structures involved in attention and control of the autonomic nervous system, including the DLPFC, posterior parietal cortex, as well as the ACC. Such practices can decrease or increase theta activity, again suggestive of ACC activity and down or up regulation of sympathetic activity. If willpower is in part rooted in emotional and physiological mechanisms, then it stands to reason that training that enhances cognitive control over the application of sympathetic and parasympathetic responses will enhance one's ability to realize one's freely chosen ideas and decisions more efficiently than if one is prone to fly off the handle, panic, flee, cry, or cower inappropriately. In another fMRI study that compared meditators with non-meditators, either when meditating or not meditating, Judson Brewer and colleagues found the following very interesting patterns of activation. Here, from their 2011 paper, we can see images that provide two views of the brain. One is a sagittal slice through the middle of the brain, and the other offers axial cuts through the brain. On the sagittal slice, we can see that meditators have a relatively more active dorsal anterior cingulate than non-meditators, both when they're not meditating and when they are meditating. We've seen exactly this area before. It is the area associated with the feelings of willpower and sympathetic response that Joseph Parvizi activated in the epilepsy patient that we saw in that film clip. It is part of the cingulo-opercular control network. Now, in this set of images, we can see two half slices, axial slices, of the brain at two somewhat different heights. Pay special attention to the regions circled in red. This is part of the dorsolateral prefrontal circuitry that we've associated with the frontoparietal control network. In the case where meditators are not meditating, we can see that they tend to have more active DLPFC circuitry, perhaps associated with greater working memory operations or top-down control than non-meditators. But notice, when they're meditating, meditators do not have greater DLPFC activation than non-meditators. This might suggest that they are not thinking about exerting more top-down control or carrying out more working memory operations than non-meditators. Perhaps through practice, they have automatized top-down control. Now, things get really interesting when looking at which parts of the brain are relatively deactivated in meditators while meditating. These areas are shown in blue here in this midline sagittal slice. We've seen these areas before. These are parts of the brain involved in the default network, which are thought to play a role in mental simulations and the imagining of the self in imagined scenarios. So a remarkable story emerges from this research. Meditation leads to suppression of the simulations of the self in different imagined worlds associated with the default network, and this is possibly accomplished by having a more robust dorsal cingulate response associated with staying on task and willpower. Moreover, this benefit of heightened dorsal cingulate activation carries over into normal waking consciousness even when meditators are no longer meditating. Let's tie these findings in with the main claims of Buddhism. The claim is that self-referential thinking, which we can tie in with the default network, is a cause of suffering. I think a lot of such thinking is geared toward enhancing outcomes for oneself relative to others, avoiding bad outcomes, or imagining good and bad outcomes for others. If this addiction to the self tends to lead to suffering, then suppressing this kind of self-referential thinking, the Buddhists claim, should enhance well-being. Moreover, if the dorsal anterior cingulate can be strengthened through practice, one should gain greater volitional control over one's bodily and mental responses to external and internal events. In the West, we place great emphasis on potty training to help small children master voluntary control of their rectal and urinary muscles. But we do not encourage children to cultivate further domains of voluntary control very much after this point is reached. Other cultures encourage older children to gain control of their attentional, ACC, and autonomic nervous systems through specific training regimens. Imagine if meditation, martial arts, and yoga were as much parts of our schooling as art or gym are today. Imagine if we were as concerned with being mentally in shape as many of us are concerned with being physically in shape. Imagine if we admired someone for the degree to which they had cultivated their minds to a point of mental fitness, mastery, and health, to the same extent that we currently admire people for being physically fit and healthy. Imagine if religions were not based on beliefs that science has made now largely unbelievable, but instead were based on practices that cultivate volitional attention, self-mastery, reason, kindness, and altered states of consciousness.